Reality is not always pretty. It's not always nice. But it is. Reality simply is. There are wars, there's famine, there's so much disease, there's so much going on that it's very difficult, right? Like it's not just sunshines and rainbows. But if we look at it from a more non-judgmental standpoint, we can look to understand what it is rather than looking at it from the outside in and judging it and saying, oh, that person shouldn't have done that. And so instead of you judging that person, you can now actually go and help the person rather
But
than
what
just
if
being standoffish.
But what if I'm the one who's caught up in that war, and my family is getting destroyed and my house is getting bombarded, and I'm actually
Reality is
in it?
right.
How do I then resort to non-thinking? Is that even possible?
Yeah, so a lot of times, like that's a great example of like, what if this thing is actually happening? Let's say we're losing our house, we're losing our family, we're going through this illness. Is it helpful to label it as the worst thing in the world? A lot of times, how can we view it from a more non-judgmental or neutral standpoint of what is happening? Because a lot of times when we're judging it, we become a victim. And when we're victims, we can't take action because we think that someone needs to come save us, that the world is unfair and that other people need to go and fix it for us. But when we look at it from a non-thinking standpoint, right, then we can say, what can I do about this situation? How can I actually help my family in this time of crisis? What can I do to help myself? And how can I bring a lens of love into it, which is a different way to frame the situation? This doesn't mean that we say everything is all fine and like it's the best thing that's ever happened to us. You don't have to reframe it in that way, and it's probably just as unhelpful. But how can you bring a little bit more love into the situation, which desperately needs it?
Hmm.
How can you bring a little bit more joy to someone else? What can you do right now? We're judging
Yeah,
it, we become a
I
victim.
asked that question also because, in mental health, and there is we are always wary of um individualizing problems, right?
Mm,
Problems that are born out of large systemic or structural uh, issues. Um, because at the end of the day, if you really zoom out and zoom out and zoom out even more, an individual is can there can be a profound feeling of powerlessness in a system that
right.
is meant to really crush the individual, right?
Yes.
And so there is a school of thinking that it is unhelpful to tell the individual to take action because there is
Mm,
only so much action that an individual can take within a monster of a system. Especially if they're marginalized, especially they have multiple levels of marginalization. They're already
right. I wouldn't say that they shouldn't read it because a lot of times this can be the wake-up call that they needed.
Hmm.
It could magnify the pain so much that they realize that they no longer want to live this way. And I
Hmm.
like to view the book as a mirror more than anything else into their own mind. I would bring, or I would delegate the responsibility and the autonomy back to them and say, if you feel called to read the book and your intuition and your heart is telling you to do so, do so. If it's saying, no, it's not the right time, listen to that. But I can't be here to tell you what you should do or shouldn't do with your life. That's not my position at all. But only you know that. I would.
um, Amid all of your advice, could there have been room to say yes, and um, there has to be like the role of support systems, the role of, society and the state and all of that. Are you by not alluding explicitly to that, are you saying, oh, this is a given and therefore it doesn't need to be explicitly stated? Um,
Well, yeah, that's a great question. So I always like to focus on the individual because those are the people that make up the systems anyway. An
like
example of
every,
this would be you were talking about systemic change and or the inertia that these systems have and that it seems impossible to try to even change things. But especially if the person is marginalized and things like that. But what would you say about people like Martin Luther King, that was extremely marginalized, and he was just one person, but he led a movement of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people to then, go through the civil rights movement and change a lot of the
if you
laws that
trace
were
back
that were
history,
and the major events that have happened, that have changed laws, that have changed countries, that have changed these types of things, they were led by people, and particularly one person spearheading that. So it's entirely possible for one person to do these things. But again, you don't need to change the world. You don't need to change a whole system, but can you change yourself?
hmm,
And can you help another person change themselves too?
hmm,
That's how actual change is created, a ripple effect of one person that dominoes into many other people. That's how religions are started. That's how new philosophies are created. Um, that's how it happens, actually.
if you look in
In
nature,
nature, the
it's
same
like a,
thing happens. Natural selection. This happens over hundreds, if not thousands of years. But one small alteration in DNA then creates a whole new species. It always starts with one. So that's why the book is very focused on the individual, because that's where it comes from in terms of true change. You can't change the whole world, but you can change yourself, which then will eventually, hopefully, change the world.
if you look
And I don't ever want to delegate the responsibility of change to other people because we always have that autonomy. That's where our power is. And so
no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I think this is one of those tensions that will stay with me. When you
no,
go
I
to a
appreciate
person and you say, "Hey, you can change stuff," but that person might be, going through unimaginable disempowerment and loss and suffering that, I will never understand being the person that I am. That maybe they come from, they live with a lot of poverty, they live with homelessness, or they're disabled. And they will say, why does society expect us to become inspirational figures? Like, first of all, you made us live this life. The inequality was not my creation. Injustice was not my creation. I was born into it, or I'm struggling with this. And now you want me to inspire you by rising above all of this, and changing things. So, so that's why I'm always wary of. So they say, don't turn us into inspiration porn, right? Like,
that's a great point to bring up. And you know, that would also be assuming the position that nothing can ever change for them. And I think that's also a uh,
yeah.
that's quite damaging to the person to say, oh yeah, you're in this
Yes.
position, you're stuck.
This is
You
an
can't do
excellent
anything.
point.
This is not saying that there's not systemic you know uh, challenges that are causing them to be where they are. But that's also not to say that they can't do absolutely nothing. So it's somewhere in between. It's the system that